Now let us proceed with the discussions of the written notice. In our previous videos, we mentioned about various modes of written notice which is recognized by PAM contract. It is either by hand delivery, or ordinary mail or registered post, or fax, or electronic transmissions. The important thing here is you will need to make sure the receiver actually receive your written notice. There should be evidence to show that they have received the written notice. This is regardless whether they read through the written notice or not. We also mentioned in our previous videos that the date of written notice is not the same as the date of the receipt of the written notice. As you know, there are some procedures which have the deadline imposed onto certain event. You will have to look into the statement in the PAM contract in order to clearly define the cut-off date, whether it is defined by the dates of written notice or the dates of receipt of the written notice by the receiver. In most of the cases, it is referring to the date that the receiver received your written notice. We also mentioned previously that the circumstances as stated in the PAM contract requiring the written notice. This is important due to the function served by the written notice. In these videos, we're going to discuss further on the purpose and the importance of the written notice. Now you know that this written notice here is communicating between parties. The parties involved may include the employer, contractor, architect, nominated subcontractor, nominated suppliers, and others. Now the communications are usually in one-to-one mode. Often you will have to send a copy to the relevant. For example, some communications is between the employer and the contractor. Often you will need to send a copy to the architect and quantity surveyor so that they are aware of that situation take place. Now the purpose of the written notice, it is formal communications for the administration's purposes to ensure the smooth administrations of the entire project, monitoring the progress of the work, ensuring the payments are in place, proper management of the project, and etc. Another importance of the written notice here, it will be for the documentation purposes. You have to ensure the things to be traceable, and this is very important for the closing of the account, particularly for the final account. The written notice also serves as an evidence to timely respond. You know that for some situations, there are limits in terms of the durations. Now you have to follow up with the written notice within that specific durations, indicating that you are responding to the situations on time, and you have no intentions to ignore that. And often, this written notice here also provide the dates of references. For example, for certain case, there is a limit in terms of the durations for the responsive actions. Based on the date of references, if the relevant actions is not taken, it is deemed not entertained. This shall trigger the following course of actions. It is not just some notice being sent here and there. If you realize the purpose behind this written notice, you will find it very important, especially when you have the limits in terms of the durations. For example, under certain situations here, some written notice shall be given within the stipulated time. If this is not being given, it is deemed that you are not interested, or it is deemed that you forgo your entitlement, and etc. this might not be in favor to you. Since it is just a written notice, might as well you just provide it. And then when you have certain written notice given, this will be the cut-off date. Now, if there is responsive actions required, and these responsive actions have a limits in terms of the durations, now these calculations, it will be on basis of your written notice. Now, without any written notice, there will be a gray area. How do they define when will be the due date? Therefore, if possible, since it's already stated in the PAM contract on certain areas you must have the written notice, then might as well you just provide it. These are some examples that elaborates the importance of the written notice in terms of the evidence of timely response as well as the date of references. For example, if you detect there is documents which is not in line within the contract, that means there are discrepancy or divergence of the informations in the document, you will need to send in the written notice, notify the architect regarding that before the affected works. You have to wait for their response, as you cannot simply assume certain things within the contract. Now there is a cut-off date here, which is before the affected work is started. Let's say now there are variations involved. You have to send in the written notice notifying the variations, estimate the expenses, plus the calculations before the works. Now this one is also limited by certain time frame here. Or you send in written notice after you have practically completed the work. Then the architect will have to, within the stipulated time, evaluate your work and come up with the certificate of practical completions. Without this written notice, the following actions will not trigger. Now, architect issue the certificate of practical completions within 14 days of your notice of practical completions of the work. Another example is when you have done making goods the defects, send in a notice to the architect, and architect shall make decisions within 14 days. This is a typical situation with the date of reference here. Now, if you do not send in the notice here, this will not trigger the evaluations by the architect. Now, you are deemed that you have not yet making goods of those defects. Before you completed making good the defects, the retention fund will not be recovered. There is consequences. So, this shows the importance of the written notice. Next is the notice for the extension of time, which must be submitted within 28 days of the architect instructions. Beyond the date, you cannot apply for the extension of time. Then your completion dates will be fixed. Now, any delay due to that particular architect instruction, it will be considered non-performance of you. Liquidated damage shall be imposed, and it is calculated on daily basis. Definitely you don't want that. Now you have submitted the notice to apply for the extension of time. The architect will have to come up with a decisions. Without this, there is no decisions from the architect. That means it is deemed that no extension of time is required. Another example is about the claim for the loss and expenses. This one also had to be done within 28 days of the architect instructions to show your intentions to claim before you proceed with the work. There are many more situations where you require the written notice. These are just some of those. Now you see the importance of the written notice. It is not only a communications mechanism, it is also a mechanism for the documentations, which to the highest degree to reflect the actual situations happening throughout the project. And in the case that there is any dispute which is arise sometime in the future, by then you are looking back on the things that you have already done. Nobody can recall everything in the proper sequence, in the complete details, and in the thorough manner. This is when you have all these written notice and documentations in place. When they need to review and evaluate the situations, they can put the pieces together to see the entire pictures of what has happened, so that best judgment can be made to the highest degree to be fair and just to both parties. Now you also see the rationales why this item here was specified in PAM contract that should have written notice. Every single item here carries certain weightage at different situations and also at different stages of the project, which can ultimately affect the outcome in terms of the final account, in terms of the set-off, in terms of the decisions for the dispute resolutions, and also in terms of the final outcome as decided through the professionals being appointed to facilitate the resolutions of the dispute. One might complain that having all this written notice in place is quite messy. It serves no purpose. I would say that this is not entirely true. This written notice seems to be not serving the purpose, quite tedious, add up to the workload, only when the entire project is running smoothly. And that should be the best outcome that you would like it to be. When everything is running smoothly, there is no dispute, you get your part, the employer get the part, architect, quantity surveyor, consultant, everyone involved with the project is happy. But in the case that any dispute happen, you will feel sorry when you don't have the written notice properly in place, as at the end of the day, the entire decisions from the dispute resolutions might not favor to your side. And when this happens, this can lead to a significant loss in terms of the monetary aspects. Now you can think about it, whether it is worth it to have the written notice to be in place. And often, when end up to be dispute, you know the construction industry is not really big in Malaysia. People knows each other within the field. Now if the decisions of the dispute resolutions not favor to you, it might affect your reputations, which in another form might bring to you new challenges for your following business and project. Normally the difficult part is to get the written notice system established. Once it is established, everything should run smoothly. You just follow accordingly under the proper system, then the system will do the rest. All the best to you. It might not seem to be very important for the clause 38, but this definitely going to bring to you significant interest if there is any dispute.